Well, Penn State did miss out on a bunch of their priority prospects, practically all of them, but now it's time to maybe flip some of them, including potentially a 5-star.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is right. It is a Locked On crossover to talk some Penn State football recruiting between Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal. My name is Zach Seyko, and I am your host of Locked On Nittany Lions, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert, the recruiting insider here on the Locked On Podcast Network, hosts the Portal and a bunch of other shows here with the network. So, Brian, we're going to talk about how Penn State has a chance. We're going to make our predictions for which prospects they could flip, whether that's from Notre Dame, from Michigan, or some schools that maybe most people aren't talking about. Penn State also does see a prospect flip away from them, and they also lose a recruiting battle to UCLA. We're going to talk about those in the upcoming segment and why don't expect much out of July. If any of these flips happen, it's going to be in the middle of the season. July and August are going to be pretty quiet here on the recruiting front. We'll explain, because July has always been a big deal for Penn State. Let's get to those flip predictions first. And we got to start with the heavy hitters. Luke Wafel, Carter Meadows, Joey O'Brien, Grayson McHugh, Kari Adams. Those are the names that most people are going to concern themselves with. I don't think Penn State has a realistic chance of flipping any of those names. What do you say?
It depends on how serious Penn State is with the NIL, and it also depends on coaching changes. The biggest factor with flips during the season is which coaches change jobs. I know nobody likes talking about that subject very much because it impacts every program. Somebody's going to leave Penn State this offseason and probably every other major program. That's just the norm.
Yeah.
When somebody's coach leaves, the door is open. I don't care how committed they say they are now. Kids pick coaches, not schools. So there's always the possibility of that. And let's just use Wafel as an example. That's in Los Angeles. Out of that group, I would think he's the least likely to stick. I'm not saying that. I don't know, Luke. I don't know, but Jersey to LA is a long way. The lifestyle's a million times different. We'll see what happens, but that's an interesting one. Otherwise, I tend to agree those kids will probably stick where they are, but I would look at Wafel the most.
How about a couple of the Maryland prospects that are conveniently in the top 10 nationally for the most part, consensus? Zion Ely and Emmanuel Iheanacho. Iheanacho, I'm not taking too much interest in here because he did move up his commitment fairly sooner. He was supposed to commit towards the end of August and then bumped that all the way up, went on ESPN Pat McAfee, and committed to Oregon ultimately. But Zion Ely, that at least has my interest somewhat because Penn State's been recruiting him for a long time, and no different than Emmanuel Iheanacho. But with the way that Ely went about his visits, I think Penn State, when you're naming all of these prospects, I would say how you say, oh, Luke Wafel, at least just pay attention to that one. It's kind of the same situation here when I look at Zion Ely's recruitment and his commitment to Maryland. If we want to talk about coaching changes, Maryland might be on the cusp of one.
That is a great point. I don't know how many kids they have committed off the top of my head, but Maryland's class has got some talented players. Ely's one of those guys. He's got a massive NIL deal to go there, but you still want to know who your coach is going to be and have a long-time relationship with him. I don't care if they hired Nick Saban, and not that Saban's going to go there and take the Maryland job, but he doesn't know him.
Yeah.
Kids want to know that coach for a long time, and the parents even longer. It's really hard. So head coaching changes, all cards are back on the table. Ely's a kid everybody's going to keep telling him all year they're going to get negative recruited to death.
Yeah.
Are you going to get rid of him? I don't know, because Maryland doesn't have their quarterback back. They always have problems in the trenches, and they stink on defense most years. If it starts poorly, does that team play hard all the way through the season? I could see them folding, and he's been there a long time. Like the coaching staff, they just can't seem to get over the hump. But it is an easier schedule. Now, Maryland doesn't have to play Ohio State every year. That's good. They always got killed by them, just like most schools do. But they were still in the Big Ten as well. So let's see at about the middle of October what the temperature check is with Maryland's head coaching situation. that is a very good point, Zach, and one that's worth monitoring for not just Penn State, but several other schools too.
Well, you cover Auburn very closely, just generally because that's where you're based out of in that area. And he had a surprise visit specifically to Auburn. So what can you speak to that as maybe a precedent for how Ely's recruitment could open back up if Maryland's just totally, it's just a wash for their season?
I remember when he visited, like one of my main contacts didn't even tell me before it happened. It's just like, oh, he's on campus. And I'm like, that's unusual even for today's era, but that also tells me there's always a possibility. So Penn State could get back in that boat, but that is a recruitment that NIL is extremely important. And that usually doesn't end up being the way that Franklin and his staff want to go. But again, if the coaching change takes place at Maryland and he still wants to stay closer to home, no offense to other programs, there isn't any other good program back east right now other than maybe Syracuse, and that's pushing it. They've had one good year. East Coast football is bad. So either you're going to stay home with Maryland, who's not very good, go to Penn State or another program that's not very good if you want to stay closer to home. So I think you should watch with what happens with him, and don't be shocked if he takes a visit somewhere else. Because he's a 5-star recruit, Maryland doesn't have any leverage to tell him not to take visits. So that is a very unique situation.
5-star defensive end at Penn State seems like a pretty good fit. Seems like it.
Yeah. I mean, they produce defensive ends on a very consistent basis. So I think it's just NIL is the main reason he's committed to Maryland. I really do.
Let's talk about maybe some more realistic options and some names that most people may not know or be familiar with. Brian, there's one that you suggested before we even hit record on this show, which we're going to talk about here. As you mentioned, Syracuse. Well, Penn State lost one of their commitments to Syracuse and Fran Brown, which we'll get to in the upcoming segment and what that means and everything. So that's kind of relevant to this conversation. You talked about some offensive tackles. We'd mentioned before that, hey, if Penn State, you just said football on the East Coast is pretty weak. Rutgers, I think, would fall in that category as well. There are legitimately 3 prospects that, okay, if Penn State doesn't push for Zion Ely or doesn't have as strong of a push for Zion Ely, Y.D. Collier, defensive end who's committed to Rutgers from the state of Pennsylvania. Tavian Branch, Penn State just missed out on a defensive line commit that they were looking forward to. They did not get him. Tavian Branch, who I think should be Penn State's most realistic priority at defensive tackle, stands out to me. He's committed to Rutgers. And if Penn State's still looking for that 4th wide receiver, in a perfect world, I think they are. They're not going to take a player just because, but Elias Koch, wide receiver, committed to Rutgers. If Penn State really wants to make a push for any of those 3 prospects, I don't see why they couldn't to get what they need, what they would want to add to this class.
Yeah, that comes down to personal preference. I know I've said this on your show many times before, but I appreciate the way the Penn State staff evaluates their own way. And like every staff says, we don't pay attention to recruiting rankings. And by the way, that is a lie. I talked to a lot of these guys, and so do a lot of my buddies in the recruiting area. That's a lie. But at the same time, you still got to make your own decision. Does that kid fit our program? How many do we need at that spot? Blah, blah, blah. Give Rutgers a little credit for their recruiting this year. They've done a decent job for being, let's be honest, for being Rutgers. It's one of the worst programs in Division I history, but they've got some good players. I've kind of looked at some of their guys. If they start out the season in September pretty well, don't be surprised. Not just Penn State, Syracuse, Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech, North Carolina State. You see a lot of those programs will probably make more of a move towards some of those kids that are in New Jersey, New York, and the East Coast in general. Penn State, though, has a lot more pull. Plus, it's close. I would think they would be the most likely to pull any of those kids. And again, it still comes down to, okay, does Franklin sign off on it? Does your D coordinator, offense coordinator, et cetera? You got to have congruency on your staff really wanting that kid. And again, they don't really care if they're 3-star or whatever. They would prefer they're ranked higher. Trust me, they want the publicity, but they're going to make their own decisions on it. So let's follow the visits. That's what we start right now with kind of the summer recruiting is pretty much over. There are a few more decisions, but not many. It's now about follow the visits. Doesn't matter where you're committed. It matters what you do, not what you say. So if kids start taking visits and they're committed to Michigan or Rutgers or whatever, there's a chance they're going to flip. Penn State, I bet you the first couple weekends, I'll have multiple guys on campus committed to other schools.
Let's talk about the one prospect that stands out to you, and it's on the heels of Roseby Lubintis flipping to Syracuse. So this would make a ton of sense for Penn State, logically speaking. Thomas Wilder had Penn State in his final schools, ended up committing to Virginia Tech, former Penn State DC. Brent Pry is over there. Hey, Virginia Tech has had its up and downs. It at least hasn't had stability in terms of the direction that they're going in. They're kind of right. They're in this middle area that they seem to can't get out of. And Penn State has won recruiting battles specifically against Virginia Tech. Well, Brian, with what you've said, with what's happened recently, and history has showed us, at least recent history, that Penn State can beat Virginia Tech in a recruiting battle if they really want to. Thomas Wilder, offensive tackle, makes a lot of sense for the Nittany Lions to go and push for to add to the class of 2026.
Yeah, he's at Green Run High School. It's a program that's usually got recruits. It's Virginia Beach. He fits the profile as an offensive tackle. He's 6'6 plus, pushing 300 pounds. And I'm not trying to be mean, but Virginia Tech doesn't recruit very well. I don't think Pry's strength is with the recruiting visits. I think it's on the chalkboard, which is more important overall, but you got to be able to recruit better. He's one of the best recruits in their class, if not their best. Offensive tackles are at a premium, and Penn State knows that. Look at their offensive line last year and this upcoming season. That's their bread and butter, and it's always been, to be really honest. So it wouldn't be a very hard sell, but it's an in-state kid. Maybe he's got ties to Virginia Tech. It's only like 3 hours away. I don't know what the deal is, but that would be one that I'd watch. Penn State's got a good O-line class, but adding another offensive tackle that's a viable option, especially if Virginia Tech starts this season slow, which wouldn't surprise me, that's something we should all pay attention to.
So those are the names to initially know here. Again, things could change as the season goes on. Somebody breaks out. Penn State, like them, but maybe not enough to push for them. That all could change come September. And we're going to get to why July is going to be quiet and still will be quiet through the remainder of this month. But Penn State misses out on a defensive line prospect that I think they could have used, that could have absolutely been an asset to this 2026 class, and a player that just nobody saw it coming flips to Syracuse away from Penn State. We'll talk about it next year on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Hey, we've all been there. Logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot to a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories and not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. And get this, prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. And it's not just concerts, it's sporting events, of course, concerts, comedy, theater events, and so much more. You can also get Penn State football tickets right now on Game Time. That's right. You can go head over to the Game Time app or go to the Game Time website, and you can browse through Penn State football tickets. And if you've never been to Beaver Stadium, you'll get seat views ahead of time, so you're not second guessing yourself on what your point of view will be like when you get to the game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Some Penn State fans maybe don't want to admit that it's a big deal. I mean, it kind of is. Penn State loses a prospect to Syracuse and somebody that was committed to Penn State's class, and then a defensive line target, best prospect in the state of Massachusetts, is going all the way to Los Angeles to be with the UCLA Bruins. So Roseby Lubintis flips away from Penn State. Carter Gooden commits to UCLA as opposed to Penn State. We can explain why. There's some intel here why this makes somewhat sense. Roseby Lubintis, look, at the end of the day, Penn State did have a crowded offensive line group. Brian, you got finished praising him as a prospect and saying, hey, this guy's underrated. He has the measurables. Maybe if he gets if he loses some weight, could get some more athleticism, this guy could be a legitimate offensive line prospect. Well, Penn State is losing that to Syracuse. But when you look at the recruiting rankings, he was Penn State's 5th best offensive line target or prospect committed at the time out of the 5. So what is Penn State really losing here with Labintus flipping to Syracuse? I kind of look at this as a power move by Syracuse to go to Penn State and say, we can take one of your prospects at any given time.
I think it's just a situation where they kept recruiting the kid. Maybe he felt more love. Maybe he thought he could play earlier. There are a lot of different possibilities. But O-line is a developmental position. It's more about how many eggs you got in the basket as opposed to ranking. Guys get hurt. Guys get dismayed with the challenges of college football. Teams that come up short in the trenches don't go very far. And those that are lucky enough to make the playoff but are still a little short end up losing quickly. So look at the teams that made the Final Four, Penn State included. Homegrown, top-notch O-line talent, all four of those schools. Penn State did a great job with it, and they continue to. Losing one guy is not going to be the end of the world, but at the same time, they've still conquered their goal. Like Bo Schembechler used to tell a guy that used to work for him, a friend of mine, was, I want 4 offensive linemen in every class, period. And I think he's a Hall of Fame coach. It's probably something should be paid attention to. There's a reason for it. He knew it was a developmental position, and he knew there were going to be a lot of guys that were busts. So I know that, to be honest, Joe Pa was the exact same way. They were very similar coaches. That's what Penn State has done. Losing one's not the end of the world, but the political part of this, I know fans get mad at other schools and this and that, all the online chatter. Syracuse is not going to beat Penn State for a whole lot of recruits, especially kids inside of Pennsylvania, maybe 1 or 2 a year. But they're a rising program, give them credit for it. But if I'm Penn State, it's no big deal, really.
Well, and like we said, hey, Penn State can pivot here. For Syracuse, this is a bigger deal to Syracuse than it is Penn State. I feel like Penn State still has some options to recover. I mean, if you look at Syracuse's class of 2026 versus Penn State's, Roseby Labintus goes from one of the lowest rated in Penn State's class to one of the highest in Syracuse's class, just to offer some perspective. But yeah, it's not the end of the world, but I do think it's, hey, Fran Brown at least is gaining some momentum here. And at least we said this a year ago, at least just keep an eye on him. He's going to cause some fits down the road if he stays at Syracuse. Let's talk about Carter Gooden, defensive line prospect that I felt like was a need for Penn State one way or another, just on talent alone. 24/7 really likes him. Jury's still out with On3. Well, Rivals and On3 have merged, so they're not two separate entities. So basically it's On3 and Rivals versus 24/7. 24/7 thinks he's phenomenal. This is a top 100 player. The ceiling for him is through the roof. He has so much potential, but On3 and Rivals say, okay, he's a good player. He has a lot of intangibles that you like, but he's, a solid 4-star here. He commits to UCLA. Penn State wanted him as a D tackle. They see him as a D tackle. Now, they were going to take him as a defensive end and kind of let him figure it out from there. But I think the pitch here for UCLA was, okay, we're not Massachusetts. You can have a change of scenery here in LA. That's one. Faster playing time that you mentioned with Labintus. You can play earlier here at UCLA as opposed to Penn State potentially, right? And at the end of the day, how about we just start you at defensive end? There's no defensive tackle talk. You are defensive end here first and foremost. I think that's how this recruitment went, and that's ultimately what will win in some of these instances.
Players get very finicky about the specific spot in a scheme, whether they're an outside linebacker, inside linebacker, strong safety, corner, etc. And if he was hell-bent on playing defensive end, there's your ball game. So, and by the way, it's probably not real hard to sell UCLA to a college kid.
From Massachusetts.
Yeah. Like, let's go to the north side of LA across the street from Bel Air. That's probably not very difficult. But at the same time, I doubt Penn State will stop recruiting him. This is another one of those deals. If Penn State face plants, you're going to make phone calls. You're probably still going to text him and send him mail and all that stuff. So this is another kid to keep an eye on, because at the end of the day, while it sounds good, it's still 3,000 miles away.
It is much closer to home. I do like Carter Gooden as a prospect. Can I say, confidently, oh, this guy's one of the 70 best in the nation overall? Maybe not necessarily, because I haven't seen him in the same manner that scouts have, but I do know that this is a quality player that one way or another, I think can succeed either at defensive end or defensive tackle, which is why Penn State said, hey, one way or another, you could succeed, but if he wants to be a defensive end, as you said, full stop, that's more or less the end of the conversation from there, and UCLA wins that recruitment. So that's at Penn State. There's defensive tackles that they could push for. Maybe they go after another edge defender. Defensive line has the depth for the most part for the next 2 or 3 seasons. So Deion Barnes has been loading up with defensive line recruiting. Still stings to miss out on a prospect that, does have some high upside here. Let's finish up with this, Brian, because July is usually a pivotal month for Penn State when it comes to recruiting. And these flip predictions, well, they would be more likely if Penn State could go about its routine the way it used to. But that's all different now. We're going to talk about why and how that impacts Penn State coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. Brian, July is where these flips would happen for Penn State, where they would find maybe it's a group of 5 player. I think of Jackson Smolik, for example, how he's committed to Tulane. And then Penn State gets him for that, the Lash Bash, summer barbecue. We talked about that. And then this, it's not that it's, I didn't know about this, but I needed a friendly reminder that, hey, it's interesting that the Lash Bash barbecue is much earlier than it normally is. It's usually early in July, middle of July. And this is where Penn State kind of gets its last opportunity to make those push for those commitment flips in the middle of the summer. But now, because of the changes in college football, it's more than just about NIL. It's more than just the transfer portal. The recruiting calendar has completely changed. And now July is a full-on dead period. So where Penn State would gain ground, get to continue to build relationships. Hey, take a final visit. We know you're committed here. We know you're committed there, but just take one more, just come to the barbecue, come to the Lash Bash, camp with us for a weekend and see if you change your mind. You don't even have that opportunity anymore. Now, I know that other schools don't as well, but July was always a moment for Penn State. If they got clocked in June, they could bounce back in July. And now you don't have that. So you had that poor June. You had that awful June if you're Penn State, and now you don't have July to bounce back.
Yeah, this is a new calendar. They're trying to give coaches a little bit of a break. At the end of June, it goes into the dead period. And really, to my knowledge, it doesn't pick back up till Labor Day weekend. Like all the guys that you imagined could come to campus, they can at the end of August when Penn State hosts its first game, but practices for both college and high school, you stay apart. Then in that first weekend, it just all hell breaks loose because everybody's going to try to get kids back on campus again. So it's just delayed and it goes into the season. It's a different process, but they're trying to make it better for college coaches because, quite frankly, the NFL is winning the battle for coaches because it's a lot harder in college than it used to be. College coaches are not very friendly with the NIL and transfer portal, I can assure you. So while players like it, the coaches do not. So that's one of the reasons they made concessions, trying to keep more college coaches in the college game.
So it's not that it's favorable. It's just, it's necessary at this point with all the changes.
Yeah. It's part of it, man. And with the settlement and all that stuff, we've got the new, if you will, NIL situation. August 1st, everybody has to turn in their deals. That's the other thing I just want to throw out. Nobody has any precedent on this because it's the first year. That's the other reason we could have some flips, because there is an NIL clearinghouse. I can't wait to see how disastrous this thing's going to be. Hint, it will be bad. And all these deals got to go through. The first one that doesn't get cleared because some collective gave them money or whatever, and they think it's too much, there's going to be lawsuits. But there will be commitments that are backed off of possibly. So there's going to be a lot of wildness in August. They just can't really act on it to get kids back on campus until that final weekend. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
So that's it. And I'm not saying that, okay, every decommitment because of an NIL issue that Penn State is going to land every single prospect because of that. But in theory, you would have to think that, okay, if Penn State operates with this model of success with honor, we do things correctly, it's the wild, wild west, but we're still going to play by the unwritten rules. Therefore, just logically speaking, Penn State, in theory, could land 1 or 2 decommitments based on that. That, hey, we didn't overspend just to land a recruit. We had a process. We followed a system. It wasn't just about one player, one recruit. And therefore, I think you're eventually going to get the good benefits of that if you're Penn State.
Yeah. Like Zion Ely or somebody like that, if their deal gets reneged, somebody that's a 7-figure deal, he's going to have schools come after him anyway, but it's going to be very awkward with some of those deals because to get him, somebody's going to have to pay him under the table. Like he's not going to just take less. I think it's going to be more the lower 4-star, upper 3-star guys. Like the NCAA and Congress are talking about leveling the playing field. I can't say what I think of it, but the word begins with bull and you can figure out the rest of that because that's what it is. There is no level playing field in college football. No. That will never, ever, 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 ever happen. No. But to that point, it's just going to be the bagman stuff again for a lot of these kids, but at least they're on the table. Maybe the kids, they like the other school and they might take less. There's always going to be that chance of that too, because do we really think Ely would be committed to Maryland if it wasn't for NIL? No. I think they would have no shot whatsoever. But they got Under Armour money and they ponied up. I'll give them credit for that. So I don't blame the kid. Like, I get it. You're set for life. Who's going to really be mad about him cashing in a ticket before he's old enough to vote? That's not stupid. But if that comes off the table or any other, Carter Gooden or anybody else, there's a chance that somebody else comes aboard for Penn State. It's going to be wild in early August. I can't wait to see who is the first to file a lawsuit. It'll be a trivia question for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it could be any player. Just because we throw out some names and there is no credence to necessarily when we say this name or this player or that player. It's just because it could be anybody. And Penn State, who knows? It might affect Penn State too. I don't think to the degree that it will affect some other schools. We will see other schools get totally ravaged because I think there was a report that over 60% of ACC NIL deals would have failed the clearinghouse initiative. So Penn State might fall into a situation where one or two players, this is an issue, but I think we're going to see other programs that are going to get ravaged for 10, maybe a dozen or more players where their NIL deals are just going to, they're going to fall in this category of invalid.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it will end up being just something they got to reword it. And they'll just lie about what the number is and change it. And then the bag man will come out. No, that's literally what's going to happen. Like it's a joke amongst us in the recruiting industry. Because we've been laughing about this for a while, but it's some of the other literature and it gets super complex and warriors. I'm not going to get into that, but there are a lot of little things that if your group doesn't do it right, it's just going to be super annoying. And to be honest, I'd rather not cover that stuff. It's not very much fun. No. But one or two of somebody's going to end up with a deal that gets reneged and be back on the market. That is very interesting. Who, what, when, where, and why, I don't know, but it's going to happen.
He is Brian Smith, recruiting expert, recruiting insider here on the Locked On Podcast Network, host of The Portal, along with a bunch of other shows here in the network. My name is Zach Seyko, your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, thank you so much for checking out this crossover edition. Make sure to become an everydayer, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcasts for both of these shows to stay up with all things Penn State and all things recruiting and the transfer portal. Brian, thank you so much for the time and can't wait to catch up again. Even though it is a dead period, it's never a dead period when we can talk about the insights in recruiting.
That's true. Looking forward to it.